So today we're going to be looking at editing and proofreading. So when you have written your assignment, how do you go about editing and how do you proofread your work? But before we start, we're going to look at both terms. So what is editing? What is proofreading? Is there a difference between the two? Okay, so during this session, I'm going to be having some water. So if I pause for a few minutes, I'm just having some water and then I will continue. We will have a break between the two sections. So after the editing, we will have a break and then we'll look at proofreading. All right, let's begin with editing. Editing refers to the process where the writer or the student decides to rewrite their writing with a focus on the overall content and the logical flow. So yeah, the focus really is, on the bigger picture. So when you're editing, you're focusing on, did I answer the question correctly? How is the flow? How is my structure? Are the ideas coherent? Are the ideas answering the question? Did I digress at any point? Whereas proofreading refers to the stage that comes after editing, where you now revise superficial errors like spelling, grammar, punctuation, formatting. The reason we say superficial is because if you have not answered the question, regardless of having, perfect grammar or language, you may still fail. Let's say you were asked to discuss the consequences of COVID and you discuss maybe the causes of COVID, you have not answered the question. So it doesn't matter if your formatting is correct, if your grammar, your punctuation, referencing are correct, you will not make it, right? You may not have above 50%. But if you've answered the question correctly, you probably have a 50, and the other aspects, will then add on to moving you from a C grade to a B or an A grade. So editing takes place throughout your work. So from the moment you start, after your first draft, the moment you start looking at your work for the structure to see if you've answered the question, you've started your editing, and the editing process takes place, throughout. When you're done with your structure, with your content, and you're sure that, I'm answering the question, I've used the appropriate structure, then you can now start looking at your grammar, your referencing, formatting, and so on. So editing requires careful analysis and critical thinking, whereas proofreading requires a great deal of attention to details. So you will see that to check if you've answered the question, if the structure is correct, you need to think critically. But to look at, if your grammar is correct, if your formatting is correct, you need to really pay attention to details. Okay, now that we have an idea of what editing and proofreading is, editing can be done through the following ways. So the first, we're going to look at all of this in detail. The first is, do you comply with the assignment instructions? Is your style appropriate to the audience? Is the content correct? Is the structure appropriate? How did you organize your ideas? Then you can look for clarity and conciseness. Now let's look at each of these. So when you're editing, the first thing you need to do is to create some distance between you and your text. So after writing your first draft, what you want to do is not to edit immediately. Give it some time. Maybe take 3 to 4 hours or a day. Then you can start, doing your editing, thinking critically about the content. Allow some time to pass between the written draft before checking it. Then choose your medium. How do you want to edit your work? Do you want to edit it? Maybe you want to print it. And if you maybe were typing on the computer, you might want to print it out, because sometimes changing the medium might make you see those mistakes even clearer. Or if you were typing or you were writing with your hand, maybe you want to type it out and use the computer to edit. So how do you want to go about editing? Which medium do you want to use? Then, of course, choose a suitable place where you will do your editing, in a quiet area that is really free from distraction. Also avoid long stretches. Although we say give some space, 3 days might be a bit too much. Okay, so a couple of hours or the next day will be better. Another way to also edit your work, apart from you doing it yourself, or let's say you've edited it yourself, it's also very good, for you to share that work with someone else. Maybe ask a friend to have a look. Give them the instructions, give them the question, ask them to have a look. Then they can give you their opinion on whether you answered the question correctly, if they understand how your assignment is structured, how the ideas flow. Because sometimes when you write, you understand it because you're the one writing it, but a second person might not understand what you're saying. And if another person, your friend, cannot understand it, the lecturer might not be able to understand it, right? And you can also use myself to help you go through your work. So if you don't have a friend, you can also book for one-on-one consultation with me so I can go through your work to really give you an opinion on how you have structured your work or if it makes sense. Now, we saw that in editing, there's a couple of things that you need to look at, right? So we saw that you need to look at the instruction, you need to look at the content, the structure, and the organization. So let's begin with the content. So editing for content. What do you need to do when you edit for content? So this is the most important part of editing, because as I've mentioned earlier, if your content is not correct, you will not pass. So the first thing you want to edit is to be able to edit for content. Okay, so what is the first question you need to ask yourself when you're editing for content? Ask yourself, does the opening paragraph provide a clear indication of the purpose or the broad outline of the content? So in your introduction, be it an essay, be it a case study, be it a business report, be it a scientific report, you need a clear indication of what your work is all about. Were you able to really tell the reader the purpose of this report is to, the aim of this report is to, the purpose of this case study is to, this essay sets out to argue that? Did you give the reader a clear indication of what the essay will be about? Then did you also provide an outline of the different aspects that you'll be addressing in your work? Now, this is different from the purpose. The purpose is usually written in one sentence. It's one sentence that tells the reader or gives the reader an overview of what you'll be discussing. For example, this essay sets out to address both the positive and negative consequences of COVID in higher education in South Africa, right? That's the purpose. Now, the outline, on the other hand, are the different things that you'll be addressing. That is, what are the different areas that you'll be looking at, be it in your report, your case study, or your essay? Now you want to tell the reader that, this essay will firstly address, loss of life as a negative consequence of COVID. It will further address, loss of employment as a negative consequence. Then it will move to addressing the rise of technology as a positive consequence of COVID. So you see, this is now where you tell the reader the different aspects that you'll be addressing in your essay, in your report, in your scientific report, business report, or case study, depending on the type of work that you are writing, right? So this is the first thing that you need to look at. And this usually is important because it needs to be a direct answer to your question. So when I look at the purpose of your work and I look at your question, there needs to be a direct link between the purpose and the question. So if the question was saying, discuss the causes of poverty in Africa, your purpose needs to be something around this report sets out to address the reasons why poverty occur in Africa. You see, it is a direct response to the question. Once you are sure that I have a clear purpose and I have clearly indicated the different things that I will be doing in this work, the next question you then need to ask yourself is, Does every part of the text contribute to the key idea in order to make a meaningful whole? Now, this is very important, and this is how you're able to see if you're digressing at any point or if you're including information that is irrelevant, that may take unnecessary word counts, or that may really confuse your reader as to what your argument is or what the purpose of your work is. So each sentence that you write needs to be a supporting sentence to your purpose. When you write a sentence, ask yourself, does this answer the question, or does this contribute in answering my question? Am I able to really guide the reader throughout my work so that they can understand, my purpose throughout without getting confused? Is every sentence relevant to the purpose without digressions? Even your examples need to support your purpose. Your references need to support your purpose. When you add a reference, you ask yourself, does this reference support my thesis or my topic? Let's say, for example, you're discussing, your paragraph is addressing loss of life as a negative consequence of COVID, right? Then you have a reference that states that the WHO reported that a lot of children are dying in Africa due to war. Now you're talking about loss of life, but you're talking about loss of life in terms of COVID. But now you're referencing is talking about children dying due to war, not COVID. Now, what have you done here? You've digressed, and if you included a reference that does not directly support your argument, so you will lose marks. So you need to ask yourself, with each reference that you include, each example that you include, does it link to your purpose? Does it link to your topic sentence? Then you need to ask yourself, does the literature support the argument? Okay, this is what I've just been explaining. So the literature is the same as the reference, right? Then are the explanations clear? And with the explanations, it's easy, as I said, if you can give a friend or you can ask the consultant, to look at it. Sometimes you might think it could be clear to you because you wrote it. But sometimes if you give it to someone else, you might realize that it's not clear to them what you really mean, right? Are the conclusions relevant? Are they clear? Did you summarize, your purpose? Did you summarize all the main points discussed? Does it link to the purpose you indicated at the beginning of your work? Do the summaries link to all the outline, all the things that you have discussed in each paragraph? So you need to double check all of this when you are editing for content. And if you can have a tick for each of these boxes, then you can definitely guarantee, that you have effectively edited your work for content. The next important step, once you are done editing your content, now you want to edit for structure. Now, here we're looking at the structure of an AC. But editing for structure is not just, it depends on the type of work that you are doing. So if it's a scientific report, for example, you'll be looking at different things. If it's a business report, you'll be looking at different things, right? But for the AC, what you'll be looking at is, number one, in the introduction, is the context clearly indicated? Did you provide background information to your work? Let's say you are discussing, let's maintain our topic, we're talking about COVID, right? So you want to maybe say something like COVID started in September, emanated from China, September 2019, then spread to the entire world and also in Africa, so you are kind of bringing the topic back home. Then you want to state what the aim is, right? Then you want to make sure if there's any concepts that need defining, you want to define it. Maybe you want to tell us what COVID is in the first place, right? Then you want to provide a scope. So when you're editing for structure, these are the 4 things you look at. Why? Because when you are when markers, or when the lecturer, when we're marking an AC, these are the 4 things that we look for in the student's work. That is, did they provide a context? Did they introduce the context? Did they define any important terms? We want to check, did the student, provide a clear purpose? Did they provide an outline? Okay. Then, if, let's say, for example, you are looking at a scientific report, for example, in your introduction, the scientific report, the structure is a bit different. You will have a title, you'll have an abstract that you will not have in the AC. So if you're editing for the structure of a scientific report, you need to make sure, for example, that you have a title, you have an abstract, introduction, you have a method and materials, you have results, you have discussions, and you have a conclusion. In the abstract, you need to ensure you have the purpose, you need to ensure that you have clear methods indicated in the abstract, and that you have the results also indicated in the abstract. And in the introduction of the scientific report, what will you need? You will need the context as well as clear aims and objectives of the scientific report. So you will need 2 things. For the business report, for example, you will need an executive summary, you will need an introduction, you will need other parts. But for the introduction of the business report, for example, what we're looking for is, does it have a clear purpose? Did you link your objectives to some recommendations in your work? So you see that when it comes to the introduction, regardless of the type of work or assignment that you're writing, you do need a clear purpose that is consistent across all types of writing. If it's a case study, you need the context, as well as you need to introduce the problem and the purpose. So what is consistent is the context and the purpose. That should not lack in any introduction that you are writing. Okay. Then the next thing you want to look at is the body paragraphs. Now, some types of work, may not take the PEEL structure, and the PEEL structure is, what we call the points, explanation, evidence, and linking, right? So it's the topic sentence, supporting sentences, evidence or literature, and conclusive sentences. So this specific structure may not always apply. For example, you may have, if you're writing a scientific report and you at the methods and materials, and you explaining, you might not always have a topic sentence explaining, supporting, and so on. But you will need to make sure that there is some kind of a structure in your paragraph. So number 1, when you're looking at the paragraph, you want to ensure you have a clear topic sentence. And the topic sentence is simply that first sentence in your paragraph that tells the reader the purpose of your paragraph. So let's say, for example, you're discussing with our topic. Our topic that we're looking at is, the positive and negative consequences of COVID, right? So one of your body paragraphs will be addressing one of these consequences. So let's say we're looking at loss of employment as a negative consequence of COVID. So your topic sentence will be, one of the main consequences of COVID is loss of employment. So the topic sentence is usually a direct answer to the question. If the question states, discuss the causes of war in Africa, your topic sentence should be, one of the causes of war in Africa is corruption. So you need to make sure that your first sentences are a direct answer to the question. Then, do you have supporting sentences? Are you able to explain that? Did you provide examples? Did you back that up with research? Now, with essays, every paragraph needs to be supported by academic sources, except it's an essay where your lecturer specifically said you do not need referencing, you do not need literature, then you don't have to. But with most academic assignments, try to include at least one reference in one paragraph. Are they conclusive sentences? Now, the conclusive sentence should be directly linked to the topic sentence and the question. So it could be a summary of the current paragraph that links or introduces the next paragraph. For example, this therefore shows that corruption is one of the main causes of poverty in Africa, but the essay continues to indicate that there's also political reasons for poverty occurring in Africa. So it's really just summarizing the current point and introducing the next, right? Or something like, this just shows that corruption is not the only cause of poverty in Africa, but unemployment too, right? So you could conclude the current paragraph and introduce the next. And in the next paragraph, you can use a linking word. Moreover, loss of or lack of employment is another cause of poverty in Africa. So this then links paragraphs to each other. So what I'm saying is when you're editing for structure, when you look at your paragraph, it's that paragraph, but ask yourself, how does that paragraph link to the next paragraph? Now, if you're writing things like a business report where the PIL structure might not work, or maybe scientific reports, what you want to do is to still have topic sentences. The concluding sentences will mostly just summarize the current paragraph. And then you want to make use of, linking words, right? But what is important and should be consistent across your different types of work or writings is discuss one idea per paragraph. If you're writing, you should be able to discuss one idea per paragraph. Your conclusion. When you are writing the conclusion, you want to ask yourself this question. Was I able to summarize all the main paragraphs? Do I restate the purpose of my work? Do I provide opinions or recommendations? The catch with the conclusion is try to avoid new information. So the recommendations could be new information. By no new information, we mean if you're discussing the causes of poverty in Africa and you discuss maybe 4 causes, and then when you write in the conclusion, you remember 1. Do not add it. If you want to add it, that means you have to add it first in the body. You need a paragraph of it, then you can add it in the conclusion. So you can't come in your conclusion and then add another cause of poverty in Africa that was not addressed in the body. So here you just want to provide recommendations, restate your aim, and summarize main aspects addressed. Most scientific reports don't have a conclusion, but if it does, it will follow the same structure. With the case studies, for example, what is specific with the case studies is that you want to summarize main points, restate, but recommendations are key. With the essay, you can provide a concluding remark. You don't need to provide recommendations, but with case studies, for example, you have to provide recommendations, right? So that is the difference sometimes across different types of academic writings, that recommendations might be needed in other cases, and in other cases it might not be needed. Okay, but what is consistent is you will have to summarize what the work was all about in all introductions, in all conclusion. When we say conclusion, we mean a summary of your work. And to understand that summary, we need to understand what the work was all about. Now, one thing I want you to keep in mind when you're editing for your conclusion and introduction is that when your reader reads these 2 sections, they should be able to have an overview of what your work was all about without having to look at the body. And if your introduction and your conclusion captures that, then you know that you have structured it correctly. Now, when we look at the structure of your work, right, we look at, you have introduction, body, paragraph, conclusion. So it's the bigger picture. When we look at your structure, we look at, let's say, the scientific report. Do you have an abstract? Do you have an introduction, methods, discussion, results, and so on? With the business report, you have an executive summary, introduction, different parts, recommendations, appendices. So when we look at the case study, you have an introduction, description, discussion, conclusion. Cohesion, on the other hand, this is specifically, you get marks specifically for how paragraphs are linked to each other. So the focus here is, how do you move from one idea to the other? You may have clear or logically structured paragraph, introduction, conclusion, but you don't guide the reader from one idea to the other. So moving from paragraph 1 to paragraph 2 to paragraph 3, is there some kind of a logical flow of ideas? Do you guide the reader through that process, or you simply jump to the next idea? So in order to ensure for coherence, ask yourself, is there topic sentences? Are the paragraphs, do they discuss one single idea? Has every idea been given sufficient weighting? Now, this is important. The main thing you will lose, or one of the main ways in which you can lose marks in most academic writing in terms of cohesion, is the weighting. Now, what do I mean by weighting? Some paragraphs are this length. I hope you can see what I'm drawing on the slide. Sorry, let me just fix this. So let's assume these are your paragraph, and one paragraph is this small, and the other is this big, and the other is this tiny, and you know, one is this long. Now, this means that you haven't given sufficient weighting to your paragraphs. This is paragraph 1, this is paragraph 2, this is paragraph 3, and this is paragraph 4. Now, these are 4 different paragraphs that have 4 different lengths. One is extremely long, like up to maybe 400 words, and one is like 50 words. The other is like, 200 words. So what you're doing is you're not giving your paragraphs equal weighting, and it appears as if you are giving enough attention to one paragraph, but you're not giving enough attention to the other. Or this may mean that one paragraph, the one that perhaps has too many words, maybe you've discussed 2 ideas, or maybe you've digressed, you've gone out of topic. That could be an indication. So what you want to do when structuring your paragraph to really achieve cohesion or coherence is to make sure, right? So coherence simply means the logical flow of ideas in your work. So for you to achieve coherence, you need to ensure that your paragraphs are of equal length or almost equal length. So I'm not saying it needs to be 500 words for each paragraph or 200 words, but if one paragraph is 200, maybe the other can be 250, the other can be 180 or 220, 250 is a bit too much, maybe 200, 210, 200, 190, and 90. So close, they need to be close to each other. This, once you have that in your mind, this will ensure that you have paragraphs of equal weighting, so that each paragraph have a topic sentence. Okay, I'm going to explain using 2 or 3 sentences. I'll provide 1 example for each paragraph, or I'll provide 2 examples for each paragraph. Then I'll provide 1 or 2 references for each paragraph. Then I'll conclude. Once you have that in your mind, that paragraphs need to have equal weighting and equal attention, that will make your work very coherent. It will even guide the reader. Oh yeah, this is how, Lungile writes. It's always, there's a topic sentence, then they'll explain, then there's examples, then they support it with literature, they conclude. You do that with each paragraph. That will ensure coherence and will give you more marks. Does the text flow logically from one paragraph to the other? Now, this is your concluding sentences. When your concluding sentences introduces the next, or your linking words, so transitional words like furthermore, however, thus, moreover, These words link your paragraphs to each other. You know, you've discussed one cause and the next one you say furthermore. You're telling the reader that this is another. So it provides that logical flow of ideas between one paragraph to the other, right? And within your paragraphs, using words like this, you know, or this means that, therefore, this shows that, or pronouns like they to refer maybe to something you've mentioned before. This again will just provide that flow in your ideas. So after you've edited for cohesion, you want to check if, you know, the text has been worded concisely. This is somehow tapping into the proofreading, but not necessarily in full details. Yeah, superficially, you want to just check if, you know, you are using a clear language, you know, avoid words like actually, basically, avoid jargons, you know, slangs and cliches, you know, like varsity. Have evidence been given to back up your statement? Does each paragraph contains enough evidence or equal evidence? Avoid long sentences, avoid contractions, and so on. But we'll look at this in more detail in the proofreading section. So this, when you're done with the structure, the coherence, yes, you want to look at the clarity and conciseness in a more, not in a detailed manner. Then you want to pause, give it some space, and then you will start looking at that in more detail when you look at the proofreading. So when you're done editing, these are the questions that you need to answer. So you need to mark a tick for each of these. Does the content answer the question? Should any information be added or deleted? Is the work coherent? Does the content suit the audience, right? For example, when you're writing for academics, you want to use the formal tone and register. You want to use a formal language, right? Is the work in line with academic writing? Academic writing is it's writing that is clear, concise, and backed up by evidence and follows the specific structure of the specific type of work. Does the piece follow appropriate conventions regarding the format? Is the writing clear, exact, and concise? Have all instruction be followed? Every assignment has instruction. Answer one of the two questions. You know, use this specific books or academic sources. Use 5 academic sources. You know, it gives you specific instructions. Check your instructions. Have I followed all the instructions? Are the sentences of appropriate length? You want to avoid too many long sentences, but also avoid choppy sentences. So you don't want overly short sentences. You know, he is a boy, she is a girl, they went to school, they came back from school. This is what we call choppy sentences. He is a boy that went to school. So you want to maybe make it complex sentences, compound sentences, and short sentences. Are subheadings allowed? If so, did you use them effectively? Are they numbered correctly, coherently? For example, if you're numbering the introduction 1, you know, then you can't number the first point 1 again, right? So the first point will be a 2, and if there's a sub point, it will be a 2.1, and then there will be a 2.2, then there will be a 3, then there will be a 3.1, then there will be a 3.2, then we're going to have a 4, a 4.1. So you don't want too many 4s, too many 2s, too many 3s. Alternatively, you can have a 1, an A, B, C, and so on. Then the next thing you want to check is, are the sections of the paragraph of appropriate length, right? Should any tables or figures be added? If there's tables or figures, are they included and well designed? Did you reference them? Will typographic devices such as italics or bullets be helpful anyway? Is the piece well organized at various levels? So these are the different questions that you need to have a tick. And if you've responded to all of these questions, then you are done with your editing and you can move on to now working on your proofreading. So proofreading is the stage that comes after your editing section. Okay, we're going to have a break, but we'll have a break at 4 o'clock. So let's continue till 4. Then we're going to have a 5 minutes break if we're not done with the presentation. Okay. All right, let's continue. So proofreading. So once you're done with your editing, you've edited for the instructions, you've checked the content, you've checked the structure, you've checked the cohesion, you've checked for clarity of language, you want to now move to the other aspects. Usually separate these two stages. So don't edit and proofread at the same time. So if you're done with your editing, give it some space, a couple of hours or a day, then you can now start proofreading. So when you're proofreading, you will look at the spelling, the typography, the grammar, the punctuation, the language, the formatting. Then you review anything that might or you might have missed in the proofreading stage. All right? All right. Just one moment. Let me have some, just checking. All right. Okay, let's continue. Any questions regarding proofreading? If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat, or you can unmute your mic to ask. So proofreading is not an identical process to editing. Though they overlap in some respects, it is a good idea to keep them separate. So use Word for grammar and spell check. So if you're typing your assignment, the first step to your proofreading is just check, your grammar using the word and grammar spell check. All words highlighted in red or blue should draw your attention to the fact that there could be a grammatical problem. So review that. However, don't rely only on spell checks. Why? Because some words will be highlighted when they're not wrong. Usually names that are not recognized by word, like our African names, usually will be highlighted, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. Also, sometimes it will not pick up a word as wrong, which is not correct. For example, you could say there, right? It could be synonyms. It's wrong, but it's not going to be highlighted. I'm going to type that in the chat. So for example, my chat is just loading. You could mean there for possession, right? But you said they. So the word will not pick that up as a spelling error or as a mistake, right? But it could be a mistake. So what we're saying is the spell is really just the first step to just help you with your proofreading, but it shouldn't be the only thing you rely on. Focus on one kind of error at a time. Now, what does this mean? If you're proofreading for punctuation, look at the punctuation only from the beginning to the end, without looking at maybe the language or the clarity of the messages and so on. Look at the punctuation only. Once you're done with the punctuation, then you can look at the sentence structure. How did I structure my sentences? Once you're done, then you can look at, the language. Do I have contractions? Did I use slangs, cliches? So edit for one error at a time. That will make you maximize your editing, because then you'll be able to ensure that one area is fully edited before you move on to the next. Accept the fact that it's a slow process. Now, editing can be stressful, it can be daunting, because you might not be able to see all those mistakes at once. Sometimes you have to read again and read again, give some space and come back to it, give it to your friend to read and give it to a consultant queen to read. So it's a process, right, to really go through, because there's so many grammatical rules and English is not most of our first language, and it's difficult sometimes. So give yourself enough time to really go through all these different aspects in your work. Another good strategy to proofread is to read out loud. When you read out loud, you're able to separate what is on paper from what is in your mind, because sometimes when you're editing, you realize that you're actually reading what is in your mind and not what is on paper. So when you read out loud, it gives you a best stand in terms of you actually reading what is on paper, and you'll be able to pick out those mistakes even more. Then decide, how do you want to proofread? If you use a computer to write, I'll advise you print it out. But of course, we do understand, financial constraints. If you're not able to print it out, you can still edit using your computer, but maybe change the space that you sat to write the exam, maybe, or sorry, the assignment. If you wrote maybe in your bedroom, maybe try to edit in a different environment. That sometimes helps to just give that space between the different drafts. Focus on common reoccurring mistakes, meaning if you see that you've used the comma wrongfully 2 times, it's possible that you've used it wrongfully more than 2 times. So once you have identified an error for the 3rd time, write it down somewhere that, I struggle with a comma splice, which is using the comma wrongfully. Write it down somewhere. If you see that there's 3 places where you miss the full stop, write it somewhere that you have a problem with full stop. That means that you need to pay specific attention to that specific error. It's called reoccurring errors. And if you can focus on your reoccurring errors, I can guarantee you that your writing will improve, because noticing a mistake is the first step to fix it. And if you are able to diagnose that, okay, you know what, with when it comes to my writing, I struggle with, number 1, comma splices, and you write that down, you see that your focus will be on that, and you'll then improve on that mistake, which will be not visible in the coming drafts. And that means you have improved in terms of your academic writing, because you will no longer be doing that specific mistake. Now, on Thursday, we're going to have a workshop on grammar and language, where I'll walk you through all or majority of punctuation. I'll tell you how to use them. I'm going to provide examples on how to use them, which will help you with your proofreading, right? So today we're not going into detail about all the punctuations, but in Thursday's workshop, we'll go into details about all or almost all punctuations, most punctuations used in academic writing, as well as what to look for in terms of language in detail with examples and so on. So please take the time to attend the workshop on Thursday. And for the editing, today we have looked superficially, but tomorrow we'll look at how to actually write an essay, and I will give you an opportunity to write an introduction. I'll provide you feedback on it. I'll give you an opportunity to write a paragraph, and I'll provide feedback on the paragraph and so on. So today we're really looking at what to look for when editing and proofreading. But to support today's workshop, please attend tomorrow's workshop and Thursday's workshop to really guide you through the structure part as well as the grammar part. Okay, one mistake at a time. Then also check, have you proofread for citations separately? So once you're done with the grammar, then you want to check your referencing. We'll look at all of this in more detail. So when you're editing, we're not editing, with proofreading. One moment, please. Just give me a moment. All right. Sorry about that. All right. When you're proofreading, so start with your cover sheet. Do you need a cover sheet? Do you need a title page, right? check if what your assignment requires, and make sure that you have your name, your student number, your course number, the lecturer's number, the lecturer's name or the tutor's name. So check what is needed on your cover paper or the title page. Now, proofreading is where you check for everything, right? So you want to make sure that all instructions are followed. So title page, student number, you won't leave this on the day before you submit it. You start checking, do I have my name? If you're not supposed to include your name, do you have your student number, the course, the title of the question, the title of the assignment or the question, all necessary information, have you included them? Did you number all the pages? Are all pages numbered, and so on? So you will see that depending on the assignment or the module, this is an example of the things that could be on the cover sheet, right? So you see that on your cover sheet, you could have your name and last name, student number, the course title, the assignment number, and the assignment question. So these are the different types of information that you usually find on your assignment. The next thing when proofreading is the word limit. Now you will see that with most assignments, they will tell you write between 900 to 1,000 words, or between 1.5 to 2,000 words, or they will say up to 2,500 words, or they will say not more than 2,500 words, right? Now, this is important because you may lose marks if you don't adhere to this specific instruction. So assignment lengths are usually given in terms of numbers of words. Unless the lecturer tells you that these limits are strict, it normally will be acceptable to be about 10% above this word limit. So for example, a 2,000 word assignment should be between 180 and 220. So 10% above or below, it's okay. If the assignment uses the word up to, as in up to 2,500 words, that usually means you cannot go above that limit. So you need to be careful. If the assignment says about 2,000 words, that means it could be 10% below or above. But if it says up to, then it shouldn't be more than 2,500. So it should be close to that, or it could be that same amount, but it shouldn't go above it. So unless the lecturer tells you otherwise, the word limit does not include things like the cover page, table of contents, figures, the reference list of works cited, or the bibliography or the appendices, right? So most often when they say 2,500 words, it doesn't include those aspects unless the lecturer says it is included in your word count. Okay. Now, what do you do if you have written your work and it's too long? How do you proofread your work so that you get to that word count? When students are editing their work, a lot of the struggles sometimes come when they struggle with, okay, my work is too long or it's too short. So let's say you were supposed to write 2,500 words and you are somewhere, 3,500 words. You're like 1,000 words above. So the question is, how do I bring it down to 2,500? Then we're going to look at if it's too low, how do you take it, or what should you consider to bring it up to the accepted word count? So don't try to remove single words from your assignment. It is unlikely to reduce the assignment length significantly, but it may instead confuse your reader. So in trying to reduce your word count, instead, aim to condense whole sections of your assignments. So instead of focusing on, let me take out words here and there, be careful with that, because taking out a word may change the entire meaning of your sentence. So instead of doing that, you may want to provide summaries of certain sections or completely take out certain sections. Maybe if you were discussing causes of poverty in Africa and you discuss 5 causes, maybe you might want to make it 4 causes, right? Or if you were providing 2 examples for each paragraph, maybe you want to provide 1 example for each paragraph. If you were providing 3 references for each paragraph, maybe you want to bring it down to 1 reference, or randomly sum 2, others 1, right? So you want to reduce, think about it in terms of sections, not just I need to take out a word here and there. Right, so you should include something just because it's a fact or just because it's included in your course material. Include something that is relevant. So another thing is go through your work, ask yourself, how is this sentence? Read every sentence and check its relevance to your question. If you have 3 supporting sentences, maybe bring it down to 1 supporting sentence or 2 supporting sentences. Be direct, state your point rather than writing many paragraphs leading up to the point, right? And also another thing that really helps with reducing word count is writing in the active voice. The passive voice tends to take a lot of sentences, a lot of words, okay? Let me give an example. Sorry, I'll just check for an example. So, okay. So for example, the passive voice will be, it has been explained that children need more individualized attention in the classroom, right? It has been explained that. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. But if you were to say the article explains that, you see that that is the active voice because now you're using the subject. The article explains that. Now you have taken out 1 word. And sometimes with the passive voice, you realize that you could reduce up to 3 or 4 words. So try to use the active voice. The active voice will really help to reduce those word counts. Okay. Then go back to the question, which sections relate to the point? Which sections are not really that relevant? Go back to the plan. Which paragraph fits in the overall structure? Which paragraphs can be combined? Which paragraphs do you think you can remove? Which paragraphs are you really over-explaining? When you look at the length of each paragraph, the longer paragraph, check, is there something that I'm maybe repeating myself too much, or I've said it 1 or 2 times? Check for repetition. Check for areas where there's too many examples, reduce the examples, reduce the referencing. Again, that will really help to bring down your counts. Try to summarize, rephrase. Oh, another one is direct quotes. Direct quotes tend to really increase your word counts because with direct quotes, you have to take it as it is. And then after direct quotes, you still have to explain what that quote means. Right? So what you want to do is to ensure that you paraphrase instead, because in paraphrasing, you don't have to explain afterwards. You can paraphrase and integrate, and you can summarize paraphrase and summarize what the author is saying, which will reduce the word count instead of a direct quote. Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break now. And then at 4 o'clock, we will resume to see how or what to do in order to reduce the word counts. Then we'll continue to look at how to proofread our work. Okay. Taking a break, as we've seen in other workshops, is very important. Let's just give some time to, let me have a cup of coffee quickly, or I have a cold coffee here. Let me just warm it up and have some coffee and some water, and then take a breathe, and you too, you can rest a little bit, stretch a little bit, and we will resume the session at 4 o'clock. All right, let's continue. Thank you so much for the 5 minutes break. Now that we've looked at how to edit or how to make sure we reduce those word counts or what to take into consideration, let's say you are too short of words. So maybe you were supposed to write up to 2,500 words and you're somewhere 1.5. That's too short, right? So how do you really add onto your words so that you're close to the word count? So you want to explain your argument fully. So make sure that every argument in your mind and your plan is on the page. So, you want to make sure that you explain more. So when it's too long, you want to reduce the explanation. When it's too short, provide more examples. If you use one sentence to explain, maybe explain in another way. If you had one referencing, add another reference. Maybe add two references instead of one, add more examples. Use 3 other sentences to explain your work. Ensure that you have topic sentences as well as concluding sentences, right? Do you have a sentence that brings everything together and introduces the next sentence? Make more use of linking words like moreover, furthermore, in, merging your ideas and sentences. This will add your word count. Look for hidden answers. Now, sometimes some questions have or require you to do more than one thing, right? So check if that question, maybe it's short because you're not answering it fully, right? So for example, the question might have asked you to use 5 academic sources, but you could realize that you're using 2. Maybe the question is saying identify and explain. Maybe you've just identified, right? But you haven't explained. Explaining means you need to, in other words, expatiate on it, provide examples, provide support. Maybe you haven't done that. So ask yourself, am I answering the question fully? You realize with most words that are not up to the word count, you tend to realize that the student is not answering the question fully or is not following the instruction fully. With more word counts, mostly you could realize you're digressing or you've answered correctly, but there's just too much information. But with short word counts, possibilities are you haven't answered it fully. So you need to be careful. It's better when you have more word counts than you have too little word counts. And when it's too short, it tells the lecturer that you haven't given the assignment enough time. Your work seems rushed. It seems as if you didn't, you waited for the last minute and, quickly put something on paper. So you could really lose marks. So you have to be careful to try not to have less word counts, okay? So did you answer the question fully? Did you discuss all the theories that you were supposed to discuss? Did you link all the materials to the academic sources as was required? Did you follow instructions? Are there no contradictions to your arguments? Sometimes you might, if it's an argumentative essay and you want to increase the word count, you might have counter arguments for each paragraph. For example, there's different structures, for example, of the counter argumentative or argumentative essays. So you could have, let's say you're arguing that COVID has had more negative consequences than positive consequences. So you might decide that for each point you will put, those who are for and against it. Or you might decide, I'm going to list the negative and then I'll list the positive. So the structure that you take will also determine the word count. If you take the structure in which each point you discuss the positive and have a counter argument, so those who are saying the opposite, and then refute it, you see that you will write more. Because for each point, you have to say, okay, this was the negative consequence. However, it was positive for others because of 1, 2, 3, and 4. But even though there were some positive consequences to this, it was more detrimental to the population. So you have refuted. So that structure will ensure that you have more word counts than maybe if you were to discuss positives on each paragraph and then discuss the negatives. So the structure of your work will also determine if you have more word counts or if you have less word counts. So if you get to that point, you might decide to change the structure of your work just to ensure that you have enough word count. So in proofreading, the word count really is important. So flesh it out, use more words, explain more examples, more references, try to change the structure, and this will improve your word count. Okay. If it's still not working, if you discuss maybe 4 courses, add another course or 2 courses and give those paragraphs equal attention and you will get to the required word count. And if you're still struggling, you can book an appointment with me and we'll go through your work, and I'll be able to look at your question, look at your work, and I'll be able to advise where you can possibly add your word count or what you could do in terms of the structure, in terms of, you know, examples and so on, where you could really add on to your word count. Okay. Sometimes it's because maybe in your introduction, you maybe indicated the purpose, but you forgot to indicate the outline, and adding the outline, you know, of what we'll be discussing, the body will increase the word count. Or maybe you're not having topic sentences for your paragraphs and concluding sentences. So there should be a reason, and we will be able to figure that out. But focusing on your structure, examples, referencing will really help out. Okay. So now that we've looked at how to work around your word limits when you're proofreading, let's look at proofreading for spelling. You want to check your spelling next. So of course you will use the spell and grammar check on Word, right? So I'm sure you know how to do this, but on your Word, if you go on the home page, you click on review. At the top left, you can click on spell and grammar. Then you'll be able to see the spell and grammar check. You can choose the language. You know, in South Africa, we use the British English or the South African English. So you can click on any of those so that, you know, it edits it correctly. Because, for example, if you do not choose British English or South African English, it's going to underline all words like this. Let me type this in the chat. So it will underline capitalization as wrong. It will underline that as wrong because that is British. Because if it's in the American, then it will expect you to spell it like this with the Z. But you see that they're both correct. It really just depends on which English you're using. So that is the difficulty with spell check. You can't rely fully on the spell check because sometimes it will highlight, as I mentioned earlier, if you were to write Kopotso, for example, it will highlight it, but it doesn't mean it's wrong, right? So you have to be careful. Then another thing that we cannot really rely on spell checks is that, let's say you meant you were writing the angle of this essay is to look at, you know, where the curve is 90 degrees, right? And then you mistakenly wrote angel instead of angle. It's not going to highlight it as a spelling mistake, but it is, because angel is also the right spelling, but then you didn't mean angel, you meant angle. So that is why you need to also read and check that you are actually spelling the words correctly. Sometimes small things like you could put do when you actually meant to, you know, to, when you actually meant to. I'm coming to that. So you see that with a lot of homonyms, like to, eats and eats, it's not going to highlight it as wrong. But one is correct because they have different meaning. To, for example, we're talking about the number. The other to is a preposition, you know, indicating location or going somewhere, or the verb to be. Then there's to, you know, I'm hungry too. I want to go to school too. So with the double O. Then there's eats and eats. You know, one is the contraction, eats, to mean it is. And the other one is the possession, you know, it's my book. They're both correct, but one will be wrong depending on the sentence. Your is the contracted form of you are, and your is the possession, the possessive form of, you know, you. So your book, you are going to school. But the word check will not pick this as wrong. That is why you cannot rely on word checks. Words with similar spelling or punctuation or pronunciation, but different meanings which cannot always be detected by automatic spelling or grammar checks like there, or where, we are, where, right? You see, even the way you pronounce them, they're close, they're the same, but they're written differently and they all mean different things. So you have to focus on such words when you're editing for spelling. Tense. So mixing the past and the present tense throughout your work. Sometimes that is also something that you need to focus on. Check that you're consistent with your tenses. Let's say you are reporting using the past tense. Stick to that. When you report, you using literature to support what you are saying. So just have some water. So let's say you're reporting. So reporting, basically, you're using other sources to support your arguments, right? You want to report in the same tense. So if you will report in the past tense, be consistent. If you report in the present tense, be consistent. So for example, if you say Johnson and John mentioned that, then you have to say Mary and Lungile discussed that. So avoid one place you say Lungile and Kopotso discusses, and then the next one you say Johnson and Tombi mentioned, right? So you want to stay consistent, but also even within the sentences, if you are saying this study found out that students performed at their best when they had 8 hours of sleep, then you don't want to then go to the next sentence and you say the study also sees that, because you started reporting in the past tense and now you're moving to the present tense. So try to be consistent. Subject-verb agreement is the next thing that you want to look at. So for example, Kopotso and Lungile discuss, while you will say Lungile discusses, right? So you need to be consistent with the subject verb, but we'll look at this more in our Thursday workshop. Then you want to look at the pronoun case agreement as well. So confusing the subject and the object of the sentence. For example, he sat between Bob and I, instead of saying he sat between Bob and me. Me and John are working on that project, instead of saying John and I are working on that project. Confusing similar words such as the verbs imply and infer, which describe different angles. Imply is when the writer suggests something written explicitly stating it, and infer is when the listener logically deduces something from the information. Another example is affect and effect, right? Affect is normally used as a verb meaning to make a difference, and effect is used as both a noun and a verb. It means a change that results from an action or a cause. So you will see that there's these words that look alike, they're really close, but they mean different things. So you need to pay attention to those words when you're proofreading. Another thing is the misuse of the apostrophe S at the end of words, which is often incorrectly added, before the S is plural. So for example, the reports are finished, right? So this is wrong because you're trying to say the reports, you're trying to mean plural. You're not showing ownership. An apostrophe is used to show ownership or possessions. For example, my friend's decks, it's your friend's decks, right? That is possession. But when you're writing in plural, you don't need the apostrophe S. So you need to also check the overly use of comma. What we call comma splices. This is the highest mistake students make in terms of punctuation. It's the wrongful use of commas. Students use commas when they're not supposed to use commas, where they're supposed to use full stops, where they're supposed to use semicolons, or where they're supposed to use a conjunction, a comma and a conjunction. Okay, so let me give you an example. I'm going to post an example of a comma splice now in the chat, just for you to have a look, because this is a really important error to pay your attention to. Okay, I've just shared that in the chat. So for example, I often study 7 hours a week. This is reason why I have an A grade. This is a comma splice. So wrongful use of comma. So the comma that you see here is not supposed to be there. I often study 7 hours a week. That is a full sentence. It's a sentence on its own. So you can either merge it with a semicolon, which a semicolon is used to show strong connection between two sentences, or you can put a full stop and start the new sentence. Alternatively, you can use a comma and a coordinating conjunction. Now, let me just put an example of all our coordinating conjunctions and examples, just so you understand what the coordinating conjunctions are. I know I will explain this more in the workshop, but just so that you can understand what I am referring to. The other aspect with a comma is when you use a comma when you're not supposed to use a comma. For example, you find students using a comma. That is the coordinative conjunction and the examples. Okay. Kopotso, comma, states that children are very intelligent. There's not supposed to be a comma there because usually you don't put a comma between the subject and the verb, right? So overly use of commas, just putting commas where they're not supposed to be. So you need to be extremely careful when using your commas. Another thing in terms of grammar, it's avoiding long sentences, and your punctuations will also help you with that. But avoid overly long sentences. Usually when you use long sentences, you need effective use of punctuation for you not to lose the reader, for your sentence not make sense, or to really capture that idea. So try not to use overly long sentences, complex sentences, yes, but try for it not to be like too extended, adding clauses and clauses upon clauses. 2 to 3 clauses should be enough. If you can keep it to 2 clauses, that is even better, because then you can quickly translate your message. By 2 clauses, we mean something like this, I often study 7 hours a week. This is reason why I have an A grade. Now, if you were to add this, you will say because studying is the best thing a student can ever do, since it leads to, increase of memory retention. Now you have added too many things and you're confusing the reader. The reader does not know what is the focus. Is it about studying? Is it about the effects of studying, the positive consequence of studying? You see that when the sentence is too long, you may lose the reader and confuse the reader. Okay. Then you want to focus on its and its. A mistake that is highly common in students' work. Just please note it means belonging to, while it is with the apostrophe S means it is or it has. For example, the car was wrecked. He slammed its door. The cat was hurt when its paw was caught in the door, right? Possession. It's a cold night. So it's here, it means it is a cold night. It's been a cold night. It has been a cold night. It has been a terrible winter, right? I'm not sure where it's going to be. It is, right? Then we have there, and there. How do you use these 3 words? How are they different from each other? There has many meanings, but it's similar to ye and often refers to a place and position. It is also used in phrases like there is or there are. There, on the other hand, is the contracted form of they are. There means belonging to them or part of them. So, for example, I'm going there tomorrow. There is nothing you can do. They are going to Europe for holidays. They are not very happy about rainstorm. Their car was stolen. I like their album photo, right? So these are examples of how you use these 3 different words. So do not confuse them. Another confusion that students usually have is these 2 words, and they mean different things. Advice with an S is a verb. It means to tell someone what you think they should do, or to give help or information. Advice, on the other hand, with the C, it's a noun. It means guidance or help. For example, her advice was very helpful, versus the general advised the president to attack, right? This is how you will use these differently. One as a verb and the other as a noun. Then we have affects and effects. I have explained it, but let's look at examples, right? So affect is to change. to alter or influence something. Effect, on the other hand, is the result or outcome of something or consequence. The wind will affect reception. Rheumatic fever affected his heart, right? So it changed, it influenced. The fever influenced his heart. The wind influenced the reception. The yen has an effect on the Kiwi dollar, right? So it has a consequence on. The effects of the earthquake were felt in several countries. Note, effects can also mean to cause something, but the issue is not very common, right? So for example, he effected a political coup by sending a private army. So you need to make sure that when you use these two terms, you really are sure that you're using them correctly. Then other things that you should pay attention to when proofreading your work is these words like year and year, right? Year means to perceive using the ears, whereas year has many meanings, but is similar to there and authors often refers to this place. So for example, I can hear the sound of the ocean in this shell. He's coming here soon, right? Lose, lose. Again, often confused. These are words that you can use interchangeably, but they actually mean different things. Lose means to not succeed, to forfeit, or to misplace. Loose, on the other hand, with a double S, means not tight. So when something is not tight. So for example, she will lose the race because of her ankle injury. He will lose his mobile phone if he keeps leaving it in the bathroom, right? On the other hand, my wristwatch strap is too loose. So you see how these words are used differently, how they mean different things. And your spell check might not pick that up as a mistake. Another word that really looks close and students usually use interchangeably but mean different things, it's principle and principle, right? Principle means a general belief or something you live your life by. Principal means most important or the person in charge of a school or college. For example, I will not compromise my principles by taking a bribe, right? Because this is your general belief, your principle, it's your values. There are 3 laws of thermodynamics, are basic principles of physics. The 3 laws of thermodynamics are basic principles of physics. The principle gave me detention. The principal problem is lack of discipline, right? So principal as in main problem, major problem. Then principal as someone in charge of a school, right? The principal gave me detention. So you need to be able to differentiate between these 2 words as they mean completely different things. All right. Any questions, please, you can ask in the chat. You can stop me by unmuting your mic. Or if you have a comment, you can make your comment. To and to. To means also, as well as, or to an excessive degree. To means in the direction, or it is used before an action. The other to, which is WTO, it's the number 2, like 1 and 2, right? So for example, cut up the onions and the garlic too. That means maybe you cut sorry. The weather has been a little bit bad and I think I'm coming up with flu or cough. It's making my throat very dry. So sorry with all the coughing and pauses. All right. So the soil is too dry for planting, right? So I was saying, let's say you cut out the onions or the tomatoes, and you were asked to also cut out the garlic and the onion. So you will say cut up the onions and the garlic too. The soil is too dry for planting. They travel to Turkey. Please fax it to me. I'm going to search the cave. Okay. Then you want to also check and make sure you've used these words correctly. Of and off. Of means belonging to or relating to. Off with the double F means away from or cancel. For example, the door of the car is stuck, right? Belonging. The regular teacher of this class, right? Preposition, is absent today. I took a day off. That means you were away from work. I took a day off work, so you were not at work. The lecture is off. It means the lecture has been cancelled. So be careful not to use these words interchangeably because they mean different things. Then you want to also check for punctuation. And when you're editing for punctuation, you want to look at the hyphen, the dash and the em dash. Now, students, I'm highlighting mostly reoccurring mistakes that are current with students' work, right? That you should really pay attention to when editing. Okay, there's a question. Let me have a look. All right. So we can say it's okay, or can we say it's okay? So the second one is correct because it's okay. It's the first it's without the apostrophe. That is the it's that shows belonging. So it's my book means it is my book. So you have to put the apostrophe to show it is. But it's here, it's when you want to show belonging. So for example, let's go back to it. So the second one, it's okay, right? I'm just trying to explain why the second one, it's okay. It's and eats. Let's go back. There we go. All right, so you will see the example that we have here. Okay, you will see it's belonging to. It's, it is, it has. So it is okay. You will say it is okay. But then if you want to say it's, you want to use the first one, it means you want to show that something belongs to someone. Because you see, it's okay, it doesn't belong. You're not showing belonging, you're not showing possession. So you cannot say it's okay, right? Because you're not showing that something belongs to someone. So you will see the examples we have here for belonging. The car was wrecked. He slammed its door. So the door here belongs to the car. The cat was hurt when its paw was caught in the door. Its here refers to the cat's paw. So you're showing that the paw refers to the cat. And you see that it here is mostly used once you have used the pronoun and you want to use it to show that something belongs to that specific subject. So that is when you will use it without the apostrophe. So you will say it's okay with the apostrophe. So this one is correct. It is okay. I hope that answers your question, Lungile.
Yes, ma'am, it does. Thank you.
All right. I often get charged with incorrect use of punctuation. All right. So basically, Longile, what you need to do is unfadingly attend the workshop on Thursday. I will walk you through punctuation. We go through the use of the comma, the use of the semicolon. We check how to use your colons, how to use your full stop, how to use the exclamation mark. We'll check how to use the dashes, the question mark, the ellipses, We'll check how to use most punctuation marks and sentence structure. We go into grammar in more detail. So I will address detailed punctuation use on Thursday. So Lungile, if you can attend that workshop, please do so. You will really improve on, your punctuation use, because today's workshop, we're really looking at different aspects that you should pay attention to while editing. So the focus is really on things you should look at when editing, when proofreading, but in terms of grammar itself, so punctuation used to its fullest and language used to its fullest. On Thursday, we will address that in detail. So please attend that workshop. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Does it start at 3 like the one?
Yes,
today?
it starts at 3. Yes, it does.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's go back to what slide were we at? Okay, so you will see that today really for punctuation, I decided to highlight just one specific punctuation because there is a workshop on, the different punctuations that we'll go through. So I'm not going to go into detail about that, but just to draw your attention to the dashes, because a lot of students use this to mean the same, but you see that there's one that is really short. That's the hyphen. The shortest one, you use that in between compound nouns, mother-in-law, theory-based, father-in-law. So that is used, for compound nouns, decision-making, problem-solving. Then you have the N and M dashes, it's the longer ones. These ones, you can use them in like interrupting commas, in the space of interrupting commas. That is when you want to put information that is not too relevant for the sentence to make sense, where you will use parentheses or brackets. You can also use the N dashes, or you can use it when you want to introduce more information. Either of them is correct, right? And then for punctuation, you also want to look at, the use of comma. You want to look at the use of the full stop, the exclamation marks, the question marks, and so on. And we'll look at that on Thursday. Then you also want to proofread for the sentence structure. So in terms of grammar, it's not only punctuation that we look at, but we also look at the sentence structure. And with the sentence structures, what you want to pay attention to is two things. You want to, number one, pay attention to what we call incomplete sentences. So sentences that we call sentence fragments. So the sentences do not make sense on their own and do not express a full thought. Those are what we call sentence fragments. Okay, let me give you an example. I'll put an example in the chat now. So you will see, for example, this is an example of a sentence fragment, a sentence that does not express a full thought, right? So it does not have a verb and a subject or express a full thought. So for example, walking the dog to the park. This is a sentence fragment because there's no clear subject or verb. In short, more information is needed. So you could complete a sentence out of this fragment in several ways. So you could say, the dog is walking to the park. That is a complete sentence. I like walking the dog to the park. Or you could say, walking the dog to the park is an important part of my day. So this is how you can complete that sentence that was an incomplete thought, right? So you look at sentence fragments. Then the other thing is you look at, in terms of sentence structures, you also look at what we call run-on sentences, right? So run-on sentences are sentences that you combine two sentences together without using the appropriate punctuation. So I was going to school, however, I did not have my book. There's no punctuation in that sentence. Okay, let me type that down. I was going to school, however, I did not have my notebook. This is a run-on sentence. A run-on sentence means it's a sentence that you have combined two complete thoughts without the appropriate punctuation. So how were you supposed to do this? So this is the way in which you can fix a run-on sentence. You can put a semicolon. right? So this will be correct. That would be the appropriate punctuation. So this is no longer a run-on sentence because you have combined it with the appropriate punctuation. Or a run-on sentence, you can start a new sentence. That will also be correct. So you need to use appropriate punctuation. So when editing for grammar, you want to look at your punctuation, but you also want to look at your sentence structures. Okay. Then in terms of language, one thing you want to look at is the first person. Now, there is a lot of controversy when it comes to the first person. Some lecturers don't want you to write your essays using the first person. So in this essay, I will be discussing I, we, you. So you want to use the third person. So this essay addresses it was found that, or it explains that. So the third person, not using the you, the we, the I. However, this is changing. Some lecturers now do not mind when you use the first person. So what I can say is when you have an assignment, just look out for the instructions. If no instruction was given regarding this, I would still advise you use the third person, except it is a reflective essay. So if you're writing a reflective essay, you will have to write it using the first person because you're writing something about yourself, your experiences, your personal experiences. So it's you, right? So you want to use the first person. But if it's an argumentative essay, discuss the consequences of COVID. You can say there are both positive and negative consequences to COVID, or this essay addresses or discusses or argues that there's more positive to negative consequences to COVID. So you want to use the third person with most argumentative essays. Except, as I've mentioned, you ask your lecturer and specifically they say it's okay to use the first person. Use the active voice mostly. I did give an example of the passive voice. Let me just put that in the chat, what the passive voice will look like and what the active voice will look like. Let me just put that in the chat. Sometimes when you see it, you're able to really remember it more. Okay, so just put in some examples. The passive voice. So with academic writing, you want to really use the active voice. Okay, so for example, instead of saying it was suggested by Kopotso that, or it was suggested by Longile that, simply say Longile suggested that. You also see it's shorter, right? It was suggested by, that's 4 words, and the sentence will probably be longer than when you had said Lungile suggests that, And then another example is instead of saying it has been explained that the children need more individualized attention in the classroom, rather state we explain it. The article explains that children need more individualized attention in the classroom. It also makes it clearer when you use the active voice. When you say it has been explained, the question is by who? It has been explained by whom, right? We don't know who explained. But when you say the article explains, then you are making the subject clearer. So using the active voice makes your work clearer, okay? Instead of saying it is considered by many public health professionals that all spending on health has been properly researched. Rather say public health professionals believe that not all spending on health has been properly researched. It's shorter, it's concise, it's straight to the point. Okay. Avoid double negatives. Not uncommon. Simply say common or often, right? Because it means common. So why say not uncommon instead of just saying common? So avoid the negative or the double negatives. Avoid contractions, right? So instead of saying it's fine to go to school, rather say it is fine to go to school. So contractions just make your work a bit more less formal, right? And usually, you can speak and say it's okay, but if you're writing in an academic essay, you will not say it's okay. It's okay, it's very vague and ambiguous. It's okay, it's very vague. What is okay? Are you saying that you feel confident, for example? Are you saying that you are happy with the outcome? Because it's okay could mean different things. If I just see you and I say, Lungile, it's okay. The question is, Queen, is it okay? Are you okay with the way I have done this work? Are you okay with the strategies I've used? Are you happy with, the steps that we've used or the font size? So what I'm saying is try to be specific and precise with your words so that the reader knows exactly what you're saying. Now, sometimes when we write because we have background information, so we know what is coming. But when you write in English, always assume that the person you're writing does not know. It's your lecturer, they know probably more than, they set the question, so they know what is expected. But when you write in academics, you write as if the readers do not know what you are writing. So you need to be as explicit as possible and avoid being vague. Avoid colloquialisms, slangs like varsity, use university, right? Use a formal tone. It's okay, it's informal, right? It's also informal, not only because of the use of the contraction, but also the word okay. It's vague and it's informal. So you want to use formal word. And of course, Lungile, I'm not picking on you. It's just a good example. I know that you just wanted to know, it was just an example you gave, but it's really just a good example in terms of. All right, thank you for that. Okay, so you want to make sure you use a formal tone and register. Now, let's give some attention to this. Referencing. The next thing when you proofreading, after you've proofread for the grammar, you've proofread for the format, the title page, you want to now check the referencing. Now, when you're looking at your referencing, the first step when proofreading, please get your guide. You cannot proofread for referencing without having your referencing guide. So check the module that you're doing in the tutorial letter. Most often they tell you how they want you to reference in the tutorial letter. Go to the referencing guide in your tutorial letter or check with the UNISA library what reference guide UNISA uses. Grab that, follow that guide step to step. When you proofreading for referencing, what you want to focus on is number one, punctuation. Punctuation is key when it comes to referencing. Now, let me give you an example, okay? So assuming Lungile is the surname, okay? And she wrote or published a book in 2022. And I'm taking the information from page 9. So I'll reference like this, right? Lungile 2022, page 9 argues that. Then I have another referencing, okay? I read another book, and this book was published by Kopotso, okay? So Kopotso is the surname. And then if I do this is a different referencing style. Now, if you look at these two references, they look the same, but can you see that with the other one, there's a comma, a P, a full stop, and a 9 to indicate the page number. But with the one with Kopotso, I use a colon and a 9. These are both correct, but these are two different referencing styles. So when it comes to referencing, you want to ensure that you are consistent. So this means if you're going to be using the comma P and 9 with all your referencing, it has to be the comma P and 9. If you're going to be using the colon, then with all your referencing, it's got to be the colon. Another thing to pay attention to when it comes to referencing is this. When you're referencing to, let's say the book was written by both authors, right? So let's say you do this. And then you come below, right? And let's say the book was written by Agnelli and Tombi. I'm just going to write that in short. Tombi is the surname, right? And Tombi. We wrote our book in 2020. Now you will see that the Lungile and Kopotso, I use AND, but Agnelli and Tombi, I use the ampersand. These are two different styles, both accepted, but two different guides or styles. So you cannot switch between the ampersand and AND. With the Harvard, if you're using the APA, for example, outside parentheses, you use AND, but inside parentheses, you use the ampersand. So this is what I mean. So if you write your sentence and at the end, you're referencing the authors, it's going to be like this with the Harvard, always. And if it's at the beginning, then it will be, and the Harvard is always, the APA is always the P, right, to indicate page numbers. So if it's the APA, inside parentheses, you use the ampersand, and outside parentheses, you use AND, right? So you have to be extremely careful when it comes to punctuation. If you're writing books that are cited by different authors, so you let's say you've said something and whatever you said, you took from different authors, right? So this is how you present it. You need to watch your punctuation extremely. You need to be extremely careful with your punctuation when it comes to references. Now, whatever information you got from these two authors, now, what you will note is that I've written it in alphabetical order. So when you're citing sources inside parentheses, you need to start with the authors with the in alphabetical order. So it's going to be Agnelli first and Tombi before Lungile and Kopotso, but you took all of these from the same source. And you can see that with the Harvard here, I'm using the AND, both outside and in. But if I was using the APA, I will use the ampersand in and I'll use the AND and. So when it comes to referencing, you see that depending on the guide, there's different rules. So that is why I said the first thing you want to do is to grab your guide. Check how they're referencing in that guide, and then follow the punctuation very, 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 very in detail, you know, pay keen attention to the punctuation. Check the order of the names. Are you writing in alphabetical order? Right? Check the year and the page numbers. Make sure they're correct. Make sure they're presented correctly. If you're going to introduce the page number with the column, use the column throughout. If you introduce it with the P, use the P. And not just the P, guys. This thing called referencing is extremely, you can really get it wrong. If you do this, you P without any full stop. It's correct. This is correct. But then if you were to do this and the next one, you do this with a full stop, then there's a problem. So you have to be consistent. Are you using a full stop before the 9 or not? You need to be consistent. Okay. Also with the colon, some have it, there's a spacing, others there's no spacing. As little as this is 2 different guides and you will lose marks for inconsistency in referencing. So you will see these last 2. One has a space and the other do not have a space. These are 2 different ways of referencing. So choose one. If you're including a space, include a space. If there's no space, then do not use the space. Which one is in your guide? In your guide, are they using a space or not? Then you want to also make sure you do not only use Lungile and Kopotso argued that, you want to sometimes say, according to Lungile and Kopotso, or you want to come at the end, you include it at the end. So you want to vary your references. You want to integrate, make sure that when you're checking for referencing, it's integrated in your sentence, it's well explained. Then at the end, you want to check your reference list. The first thing with your reference list is you want to make sure that it's in alphabetical order. That is the first thing. Then the other thing you want to check when you're looking for references, you want to check to make sure that all the references that you have used within the text, you have cited at the reference list. Sometimes students make the mistake, they cite something, let's say maybe I say Lungile and Kopotso argued that, I cite them inside my text, and then at the end in the reference list, I don't include the full reference. Right? That is, you will lose marks. So make sure that all references used have been cited in the reference list, right? So you want to check for that. And then you want to make sure that the books are cited cohesively. With the books, you need the surname, the initials, the title of the book in italics. Then you need the place, the publisher. With journals, you need the title of the article, the title of the journal in italics, the volume page, the issue number, the page numbers. When you use your hyperlinks for the internet, you need to take out the hyperlink. You just click on that blue link and remove hyperlink. You want to use the access date. If your guide is using access date, include the access date. Yes, Lungile?
So, ma'am, I wanted to ask, is it advisable to, when you quote, right?
Yes.
So when you want to like maybe back up your statement with what Kopotso has said, do you then quote unquote what they're saying? For example, if they say, let's say probably just talking about the pollution or maybe number of plastics in the oceans, do I quote unquote and then add the page number and the year?
Okay, when you mean quote, you mean take the words, take it word for word.
Yes, word for word, and also add the quotation marks when I'm writing my essay.
Definitely.
Okay.
Okay, correct. So let's say you're saying pollution has killed a lot of people in Africa. So you could say Lungile and Kopotso, page 9, argue that, then you take exactly, now the figures, 8,000 people died to pollution in Africa. So that direct quote now is a support to the statement that you have made. So direct quotes usually support what you have made. But what is specific with direct quotes, Lungile, is that it needs to be in a sentence. So for example, your direct quote cannot start, your sentence cannot end and start with a direct quote. So pollution has killed 8,000 people in Africa. And then you quote you put the reference at the end and it's a direct quote. It's incorrect. It has to be part of the sentence. So you will say something like, just like these authors mentioned that, then you include your quotes. Now those quotes are embedded, integrated in the sentence. And with direct quotes, you need to follow by an explanation. So after the direct quote, you will say, this means that, this suggests that, therefore you have to explain. So I will advise you, Lungile, to avoid direct quotes as much as possible. Usually we say for a 3,000 word, for example, you could use 2 to 3 direct quotes maximum. So do more of summaries and paraphrasing. So look at what Lungile and Kopotso is saying, then in your own words, explain it in your own words and then include the reference rather than taking it verbatim, literally or word for word and including them in quotes. But yes, if it's direct quotes, word for word, you open the quotes, you include it, you close the quotes, and you must include page numbers for direct quotes. If there's no page numbers, you include the paragraph number. So you can say para 9. You count the paragraph number and you put the paragraph number. Or if there's no page number or there's no paragraph, maybe it's a small extract and it's written in one paragraph, you can say NP to indicate there's no page. For direct quotes, you must include the page number, paragraph number, or you indicate there's no page number. But avoid use it sparingly. Did I answer you, Lungile?
Yes, you answered every question. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Okay. So when editing for your reference list, then you make sure that you cite the internet sources correctly, you check for punctuation, you check that it's written alphabetical order. Okay, so these are the different check. But as I've said, you need that guide with you. So formatting, then proofreading for formatting. When you're formatting, you want to check things like, what does the instruction says in terms of Arial? Are you using Arial? Are you using the Sans? Okay, let me go to my Word, let me open my Word document so that I can use the right terms. You want to edit for the theme font. So is it Calibri? Is it Arial? Is it New Romans? You want to check, the spacing. Which spacing? Is it 1.5 spacing? Is it 2 spacing? You want to make sure that, you've adhered to all the formatting, the word count, and all the formatting rules. You want to double check that. And then you want to check, are you supposed to use bullets? Are you not supposed to use bullets? Are you supposed to use paragraph? Are you supposed to use the footnotes? Did you number your pages? Are you consistent with your abbreviations and acronyms? So you see, this is an example of the formatting layout. New Romans 12, the inch, use 1.5 or double spacing line. So you want to go on your Word and check that you have used all of this. Okay. Then at the end, before you submit your work, to double check that you've gone through all of the checklists, you want to check, is my grammar, spelling, punctuation correct? Tick. Are the verb tenses appropriate? Are all the pronouns clear? If I say it, or if I say I, or if I say he or she, is it clear who he or she refers to? Acronyms, if I say WHO, did I spell it fully in the first time? Did I say World Health Organization the first time, and then with subsequent times say WHO? T. Are numbers, if any, in the correct style? Did I reference appropriately, both in text and outside the text? Okay. Is the language style appropriate? So if you're able to answer all these questions, then you're able to answer all your proofreading questions. So we have seen that editing and proofreading are two different stages. When it comes to editing, we focus on the content, the structure, and the coherence. Is everything making sense? Is everything clear? When it comes to the proofreading, we look at the grammar, we look at the language, we look at the referencing, and we look at the formatting of the work. We have also seen that you shouldn't do these two together. You should edit first, because editing is most important, because if you're not answering the question, your structure is not right, and there's no cohesion, you will probably be below 50, especially if you're not answering the question. Because when we mark, the content usually takes the highest mark, followed by the structure, the coherence. The language and referencing, they come after. Those are usually what gets you to the A grade, or improves your grade. So you want to edit first and then proofread afterwards. Okay, you want to separate these two stages. And we've come to the end of the session. Do you have any questions, any comments? As I have said, today we've looked at things that you should look out for when editing and proofreading. Tomorrow, we're going to get into details about the essay structure. So I will walk you through the introduction, then I'll give you a topic. You have to write an introduction, and trust me, do not need to be perfect, just an attempt. Then I provide feedback. With the more feedback I provide, you're able to really see how to structure your essay. So tomorrow we'll look at academic writing. And then on Friday, which is the aspect of editing, and on Thursday, we'll look at grammar and language, which is the aspect of proofreading. Okay, but on Wednesday, we'll also look at best reading and writing practices. So when you're writing an assignment, what are the best things you need to do? When you're reading, what strategy should you use to best read? And on Friday, we'll look at exam preparation. Do you have any questions for me? I'm going to give you my email. For those who want a copy of today's presentation, please email me and I will forward you the copy of today's presentation. Just introduce yourself and request for the specific presentation. So just say, hi, Queen, this is Lungele. I attended the editing and proofreading. May I please have the presentation? Okay, just and Mr. Kagiso has also included his email. Should you want a copy of the recording, please email him. Should you want to book for a one-on-one session, please email him.